Sometimes you come across something from the past, something so special but so obscure, and you can't really come up with a good reason for why that thing isn't a classic that's still talked about today. Hell, we're making a whole series about that phenomenon. This occurred most recently for me when I came across the video game Omikron: The Nomad Soul. It was developed by Quantic Dream, best known for games such as Heavy Rain and Detroit Become Human. On top of that, the game features an original soundtrack composed by the late great David Bowie. There are literally no other games that can boast that. And to top it off, the Nomad Soul is set in a 3D sandbox open world 2 full years before the release of Grand Theft Auto 3, which really revolutionized the concept. So with all of this evidence, I still couldn't be sure why Nomad Soul was relatively obscure. And then I played it. To understand the Nomad Soul, I think it's important that we first get to know its creator, David Cage. A quick Google search will lead you to believe that he is either a guy who makes pretty good games, or he's basically video game Hitler. But before Cage was one of the most divisive figures in the video game industry, he was David de Grutola, a kid from Mulhouse, France with an interest in music. By age 14, the kid who would be David Cage, a pseudonym he would use later when working in the video game industry, was already working with large businesses and record labels. His work as a composer eventually brought him enough success that Cage was able to move to Paris and purchase a small studio. He continued to work with various clients in music, film, television, and eventually video games. Cage's most, well, let's just say notable work in video game music was with French developer Cryo Interactive. I could list some of the titles he worked on, but I think this says it all. It was Cage's work with Cryo that led him to court the idea of writing a game of his own. "The kind of video game I'd love to play," said Cage. He proceeded to write a 200-page outline. "I wrote a scenario with the naive idea, at the time, which was, I just have to create a city. The other guys are stupid, why do they not do it? I just have to create a city, and then there will be a crowd, and it'll be science fiction, and you'd be able to go wherever you want, whenever you want, and you'd be able to enter all buildings, and there'd be vehicles outside, and you could fight, and..." Okay, nonsense. Cage brought the document to his programmer friends at Cryo, who were quick to tell him that his idea was next to impossible. 3D graphics cards for PCs were a fairly new concept, so there was a very good reason no one else was making a game like this. But Cage, being a true visionary, did what all visionaries would do. He hired those friends to make the game, and then locked them in a soundproofed room with no windows. And I'm not kidding. Cage converted a 160 square foot recording room in his Paris studio into an office and crammed in 5 or 6 programmers to make a demo that they could shop around. By some miracle, Cage and his team developed an entire 3D engine in 6 months using prototypes of 3DFX's Voodoo 1, the first consumer 3D graphics card. The demo was simple yet impressive, featuring a fully motion-captured character running around in a 3D city complete with passersby. Cage claims that this was the first example of facial motion capture in video game history, and I guess he must be right because I can't find anything that proves him wrong. Now Cage and a newly formed Quantic Dream had a fully functioning demo and needed to find some way to get the game made as their money was dwindling. They had received interest from UK-based publisher Eidos Interactive, and when shown the final demo, Eidos signed Quantic Dream immediately. Eidos insisted on adding first-person shooter sequences in addition to the third-person adventure and fighting elements, while David Cage insisted that the open world not be too open. Turns out when players are given total freedom, they tend to ignore everything else, which didn't sit well with David Cage's cinematic storytelling ambitions. With the parameters of the gameplay and open world set, Quantic Dream now just had to, well, make the rest of the game. At least this time, they worked from an actual office instead of David Cage's video game dungeon. Alongside the work developing the game, Cage was already dreaming up a list of who he wanted to work on the soundtrack. David Bowie's name was high on that list, and Eidos insisted that they try to nab the legendary artist. To everyone's surprise, Bowie agreed to a meeting, bringing along his son as his video game expert. That son just so happens to be film director Duncan Jones. Cage and Eidos had simply hoped for Bowie to allow them to use some of his older music, but Bowie insisted that he and his longtime collaborator Reeves Gabrels compose an entirely original soundtrack for the game. Cage, of course, accepted this proposition. Alongside the soundtrack, Bowie also did facial capture and voice work for 2 characters. And, well, the rest is history. The ambitious demo went on to become Omikron: The Nomad Soul and released in 1999. Players would soon be pulled into the futuristic city Omikron, whose population is threatened by a horde of soul-hungry demons. You as the player are tasked to inhabit the citizens of Omikron, to defeat the demons, and save your own soul in the process. The game was received fairly well and went on to sell 600,000 copies, although a huge majority of those were from Europe. So yeah, Nomad Soul did relatively well, but it just failed to grab the attention that you'd expect. Let's take a look at some possible reasons why. The first thing that jumps out is the year Nomad Soul was released. There's not much Eidos and Quantic Dream could have done when it seems the entire gaming industry secretly colluded to release every popular video game ever made in 1 year. I mean, just listen to the releases from 1999. Might and Magic 7, Super Smash Bros., Guardians Crusade, Marvel Superheroes, Mario Party, Street Fighter, Final Fantasy VIII, SimCity 3000, Super Mario Bros., Midtown Fighter, Stiff competition. It's easy to see how a game from a brand new developer that released only on PC and Dreamcast could get lost in the shuffle. Not to mention, the David Bowie album that featured the game's music was his first album to miss the US Top 40 chart since 1972. But that still doesn't tell me anything about why the game isn't a cult classic that shows up on every Ask Reddit thread about underrated games. So I decided I need to experience it for myself. Luckily, I'm an adult, and the $1.99 price tag was no problem, after I asked my wife for permission. Finally, it was time. After literally tens of minutes of research, it was time for me to experience the Nomad Soul and witness for myself the genius of David Cage. Look, okay, it's an old game, I get it. And I can normally move past this kind of thing, but the problems I had getting Nomad Soul to run on my computer are just a microcosm for the hours of frustration I would soon endure. Sure, it's easy to look at the game, laugh, and say, "Ha, graphics bad," and, well, you'd be right. 1999 was basically 1,000 years ago in video game time, and I wouldn't say Nomad Soul was visually impressive even for the time. These days, it's aged about as well as a glass of milk left in the Sahara Desert for a week. But it's not the boxy character models or the ridiculously tiny draw distance that eroded away at the very foundations of my sanity over the 4 to 5 hours I spent on Omikron. No, it's the game's horrific control scheme and asinine mission structure that will truly have you hoping that a demon will actually rip your soul from your body through the screen. And that's not to mention that it literally took me 10 minutes to switch the game's resolution because you have to scroll through the resolution options one at a time. And this happened every time I changed it. And in the end, I didn't even get to play at 1080p for very long because the game decided that I should take a big step back and karate kick myself in the face instead. But at this point, I was devoted to the cause. I knew there was pretty much no way I was ever going to complete the game, but I just wanted to get to the one scene where you get to meet David Bowie's character. So I suffered through the fighting sequences that were best completed by basically cheesing it as hard as possible, the jarring first-person shooter sequences that feel ripped from another, even worse game, and the ridiculous quests that often require such obscure solutions that there is no way I would have gotten as far as I did without a walkthrough. Seriously, it's pretty clear that David Cage wanted to make what is basically like a text-based puzzle game set in a huge 3D open world, and let me tell you, it doesn't work. There was one point in my playthrough where it seemed pretty clear that I should head to the new safe house I had just unlocked to advance the game, but when I got to the safe house after wandering through the maze-like alleyways for like 15 minutes, nothing happened. I mean, thankfully I had a walkthrough to consult, but all told, I ended up wasting like a half an hour. I'm all for games not holding your hand the whole way, but come on, David Cage! And just when I was really settling into this game's clunky-ass flow came the true cherry on top. According to the walkthrough, I was one mission away from meeting Bowie's character named Buzz. Just a little bit more, and I had all the footage I would need for this video. And then, I came to an obstacle that I could not pass. An underwater lever, because yes, of course, this game makes you swim. A lever that I could not get to work. This was an impasse for which my beloved walkthrough had no answer for. I was frustrated, so I just quit for the night and decided, okay, I'll try this again later. Maybe you can take a wild guess what happened when I tried the next day. Look, I could have gotten past this issue just like I had before, but I just got the feeling this was the universe telling me to quit. Ziggy Stardust himself reaching from the vast expanse, offering me a way out. So I took it and uninstalled Nomad Soul because I'm a grown-ass man and I don't need that kind of pain in my life. So, postmortem. I really do like David Cage's work. I've now played every game Quantic Dream has released, and Nomad Soul is the only one that I didn't enjoy. It's insanely popular these days to trash David Cage on the internet, but I don't know, I just can't do it. Discovering the identity of the Origami Killer in Heavy Rain is still one of my favorite video game moments ever, and Detroit Become Human was one of my favorite games of 2018. I think Nomad Soul is just the product of a guy who wanted to make something groundbreaking on his first try and, well, completely missed the mark. The game tries to be like 6 different games at once, and what we're left with is nothing more than a frustrating experience. The Nomad Soul was ahead of its time in some regards and already outdated upon release in others, but you can't deny how damn cool it is to experience the ethereal vocals of David Bowie and the aggressive instrumentals of Reeves Gabrels as you run through the streets of a futuristic cyberpunk city. If you can get past all the goddamn errors. Hey guys, thanks for watching the latest episode of Newstalgia. If you want to hear more about David Cage or my experience with the Nomad Soul, you can listen to our podcast in the description below. You can also follow us on all our social media in the description as well. See you next time.